event. I'd like to thank our partners at VerbaVoice for being wonderful, making this event barrier-free for the hearing impaired and for our international audience for the live translations. I'd like to thank Exposed Facts for their initiative for having come to Berlin with the Stand Up for Truth Week supporting whistleblowers, to Heinrich Bücker of the Berlin Gegen Krieg for his assistance, and our guests, Coleen Rowley, Thomas Drake, Mr. Daniel Ellsberg, Professor Foschepoth, Martina Renner, Konstantin von Notz, for having taken the time today to engage in this discussion. I'd like to thank Sarah Harrison as well from the Courage Foundation, and Norman Solomon from Exposed Facts is here with us today. I'd like to thank Andy Magoon for his assistance and wisdom, and I'd like to thank Edward Snowden and all the whistleblowers before and after him for having engendered this debate here today. Thank you very much. I would like to say two things. You could join this discussion when we open later via Twitter with the hashtag QVDemocracy hashtag. Please speak slowly so that our online interpreters can do their thing. And please keep your comments brief so we can all have a chance at interaction today. And I would now like to call to the podium Ms. Sarah Harrison, Acting Director of the Courage Foundation. Thank you.
Being here. I won't actually go to the podium because I'm all mic'd up and I'll end up breaking something. We're actually here today the week of the anniversary of the Snowden revelations beginning 2 years ago. These revelations have caused a huge number of headlines and outrage around the world as everybody understands the extent of the NSA mass surveillance. The other aspect that has come out of Snowden's revelations is the cooperation between the NSA and a number of other intelligence agencies around the world, particularly the BND. Here in Germany, this has actually sparked an inquiry into this, the NSA surveillance here and the cooperation of the intelligence services here with the NSA. We're actually on the anniversary of another, not too dissimilar inquiry that happened in the United States, the Church Committee. Out of that committee, some procedures were set up, including the Foreign Intelligence Service Act, the FISA and the FISA course. The Snowden revelations, though, recently have shown that this oversight has not necessarily created the protections that it meant to. In the context of the Snowden revelations and the concept of an inquiry to create democratic oversight of our intelligence agencies, we are here with some esteemed guests from the German and the United States side to have this discussion with you about how we can create democracy and government accountability in this age of mass surveillance. I'm pleased to introduce two members of the parliamentary inquiry taking place here. Martina Renner, who is interestingly, was the chairwoman for the NSU, the National Socialistic Underground Inquiry that happened here, and is again for the Die Linke, the chairwoman of the NSA inquiry taking place at the moment. I'm also pleased to have Mr. Konstantin von Notz, just here to my right, who is the chairman of the NSA inquiry here for the Greens, a member of the Bundestag for the Greens. We're also delighted to have Thomas Drake, previous to Edward Snowden, a NSA whistleblower, another whistleblower from the United States, Jesselyn, who from the Department of Justice blew the whistle. We also have, sorry, there's a lot of people. We also have Mr. Foschepoth, renowned historian and author. Interestingly, he actually published a book, which is currently in its 4th edition, Monitored Germany, which actually came out previous to the Snowden revelations, based on secret documents that he'd managed to obtain there. And last but not least, the other member of our panel, Peter Schaar, was the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information. He was from 2003 to 2013. His term was actually ending just as the Snowden revelations broke. He offered assistance to the G10 Commission tasked with oversight of the intelligence agencies. So far, they have still not replied to his offer. We will actually begin this evening with three other speakers that are sitting over there. We will part of our US panelists. The US panelists that have come here as part of a talk from Exposed Facts. They have previously been in London, Oslo and Stockholm, and Berlin finishes up this tour of theirs. Coleen Rowley is an attorney and former FBI special agent. She exposed some of the agency's pre-9/11 failures and was named one of 3 whistleblowers in Time magazine's Person of the Year in 2002. Norman Solomon is the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Accuracy and a coordinator of Exposed Facts. He is the author of a dozen books on media and public policy, including War Made Easy, How Presidents and Pundits Keep Spinning Us to Death. And last, but certainly not least, and who will be opening for us today, Mr. Daniel Ellsberg, a former US military analyst who served in Vietnam and worked at the Rand Corporation, who then risked decades in prison when he released the top-secret Pentagon Papers. He has interviewed Snowden and can certainly attest to, as the other whistleblowers can, of having been deemed a terrorist, an issue for national security, and luckily now leading the way, Dan has become, I would say, a hero to many, and certainly one of Snowden's inspirations. Daniel, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
About something that I hadn't planned to before an hour or two ago. I've heard terrible news on the internet and from my friends here, which I must speak about. There are many ways of telling the truth, all important. There is what you'll hear from my colleagues here today and what people have heard in the past who told truths, as I did, that we were forbidden to say by our employment, by our administration. Each of us had made a promise not to tell secrets to unauthorized persons. Each of us found that the secrets we were asked to keep were secrets of criminal activity, of wicked activity, hopeless, desperate, that the public needed to hear. We broke that promise in loyalty to a higher oath that each of us had taken to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, which was being violated. And beyond that, I would say, each of us was aware that what our country was doing not only violated the Constitution, but international law and universal human rights. And that is still happening. It may get worse. Another way of speaking the truth is what is happening now in the town Alpine Village right now, where some tens of thousands of people today are speaking with their bodies and slogans, no to the G7 and its programs, confronting apparently more than 20,000 police in the course of that, with some arrests. One of the objections to be made, I would say, to that meeting that's going on right now is that it is called the G7 instead of the G8, which is absurd. The excuse for excluding Russia for that is its so-called aggression in Crimea, which was indeed a violation of international law, in which, as far as I know, no one was killed. Perhaps I'm wrong. 2 of the members of that G7 right now are my country, the US and the UK, who participated in as clear-cut a crime against the peace, a crime of aggression in their invasion of Iraq, and I don't have to identify them for you, the US and UK, with some implicit support of other members of the G7, so it's absurd for them in the course of these violations which are ongoing in the Middle East right now, for them to be saying, we cannot talk to someone that I give credit to your Prime Minister, to Angela Merkel, for continuing discussion with, as we should be doing. It should be at these discussions right now. My own truth-telling was stimulated, was inspired by the truth-telling of young Americans who, with their bodies, said no to a war that I, as an insider at the time, who had been in Vietnam, understood as well as they was a wrongful, hopeless, murderous war. And they did that by refusing to the draft and sitting in doorways and on trains carrying conscripts to Vietnam, for which they were put in jail. And that put the question in my head, what could I do now to help end this war? And I've been trying to do that as an insider for several years by that time, having come back from Vietnam. What could I now do to help end the war now that I'm ready to go to jail, to prison? And that helped me think of giving 7,000 pages of top secret documents about the broken treaties, the lies, and all that brought us into Vietnam, just as some 30 years later, 40 years later, we were led into Vietnam by deception and lies in Britain, in America, and elsewhere, into Iraq. I'm reminded that on September 1st, I've said, by the way, that that was as clear-cut a crime of aggression in Iraq. And I give credit to Germany for standing aside from that, for which it got condemnation from the U.S., as did France. As clear-cut aggression as on September 1st, 1939, German troops crossed into Poland. On September 1st, 1983, I was here in Germany. By no coincidence, on that day was the anniversary of that aggression which launched World War II, with thousands of other Germans and international people with you, to protest the cruise missiles and Pershing II missiles that were being put in at various points in Germany. This one was at Muttlingen. The next day, for reasons I don't have time to go into here, some of us, there was a number of people there. Heinrich Bull, Günter Grass, two Nobel Prize laureates, Petra Kelly, a number of other very prominent people. And when I asked Heinrich Bull, actually, on that occasion, why now, why this day, and why did they pick September 1st, he said, those of us who are old enough feel that we did not protest enough in September 1st, 1939, and the years before it and after it. And we must do so now, with our bodies and our words. We didn't actually get arrested that day. The police deliberately chose to keep it less of a news event by not arresting anyone. And it was known, I think, as the Prominenten blockade. Too many Prominenten. But we were told that at Bitburg at the same time they were using police dogs very aggressively, water cannon, violent police tactics, because there were not enough Prominenten there. That's the word. And would some of us please go to join that and perhaps moderate the police tactics? So Petra Kelly and I drove all night to get to Bitburg, where I must say we did not protect people from the police dogs and water cannon. We experienced both of those. Apparently, there was not enough of us Prominente to reach critical mass and make a difference. Or else there were two classes of Prominente, and we were in the wrong one. But, and I did get arrested. The occasion for such arrests is approaching fast now in Germany and elsewhere in Europe and in the U.S. On the excuse that Russia is foolishly, provocatively alleged to be breaking in various ways the International Intermediate Nuclear Range Forces, a treaty that abolished them from Europe as a result, largely of these protests, largely in Germany. Now being violated, as I say, foolishly and provocatively by Russia, if these reports are true. And in response to that, rather than acting within international law, the U.S. seems to be taking that as an opportunity that the U.S. should break that treaty as well and replace the intermediate range missiles and the cruise missiles which we were protesting 33 years ago, a third of a century ago. Russia to be doing this is madness, insane. I can't keep remembering the word, but what is it? Anyway, I can't keep it in mind. Madness. Just as insane as the NATO policy it is imitating of the last 60 years or so, of threatening the first use of nuclear weapons. There is another word for that. Evil. Insane and evil. It is wrong for Russia to be doing this now. It is wrong for NATO to be doing this now. It was then and it is now, just as much as before. Crazy for each to be imitating the other. The joint military plans of these two groups could well have been designed and managed by Andreas Lovitz, basically with similar effects. Craziness. What to do about that? Well, it should be opposed in every possible way, nonviolent and truthful way, as was done here before, and it shouldn't happen again. I would say, by the way, that what I read this morning, and that's what I just said, the terrible news that I just heard, that this is being talked about. The idea of nuclear weapons erupting from a conflict over Ukraine, the very threat of it is a violation of universal human rights. It is a threat to the existence of nearly all humans in the world. It would inevitably lead, of course, to a total exchange between the US and Russia, which would lead to nuclear winter, ending harvests all around the world by blocking out the sunlight for a decade or more by virtue of the smoke wafted from cities being burned into the stratosphere where it will not rain out and will blot out sunlight for over a decade, leading to mass starvation, probably not of all humans, not merely extinction, but total extinction of nearly all other primates who are not as adaptable as the million or 10 million or 100 million humans out of 7 billion that may persist for a long time, eating fish and mussels and various islands and coasts in the world. To be part of an alliance that makes such threats is outrageous and intolerable, shameful. An alliance led, of course, by my country, so I'm not pointing fingers at other nationals. We were just in Sweden, for Sweden to be thinking, possibly discussing joining such an alliance that makes first-use threats of nuclear weapons is, when I say madness, I am not being rhetorical here. That's not my meaning, my intent to throw out epithets promiscuously. I mean insane. Unfortunately, a kind of human madness that is all too common in the last millennia. But there are people humans who are capable of using their lives and their voices to oppose such things. There should be a reconstitution of the anti-nuclear movement. Remember, we're here to talk about whistleblowing, but I'm saying that whistleblowing is one form of truth-telling. Not all forms involve breaking rules or promises or laws, but many do. And other forms of that are what Gandhi and Martin Luther King and the people here in Germany did 33 years ago. And if there is such a movement, I promise you I will come over the ocean and be part of it. I'm reminded, being in Germany here very much, of someone who resisted, not on September 1st, 1939, but later. Albert Haushofer, the son of a man who actually promoted the idea of drawing nach Osten and geopolitics and the need for expansion of Germany into Poland in the east and Russia. Karl Haushofer, but Albrecht Haushofer became an opponent of Hitler, participated in the coup attempt on July 1944, was found out and got imprisoned for that. By the way, just here, how many people here, a lot of you are younger, know the name Albrecht Haushofer? Can I see? Would you raise your hands? Don't be one if I don't see many. Okay. He should be known more here. He was a poet and playwright as well as a foreign service officer. And I'm sorry, there are 3-4 verses of a poem that was found in his greatcoat in a field outside Moabit prison near Berlin, where he was shot by the SS a week or two before the end of the war, not having been tried. And his brother actually found his body in the field, and inside he was touching a number of poems, the so-called Moabit sonnet and sonnets, which he had written in prison. And it applies so much to, I'll just say to myself, and I won't speak for the other whistleblowers, but I can say that for all whistleblowers, most of them, including Edward Snowden, we were conscientiously in our minds and patriotically serving a government that we came to realize was doing wrong in the world, that had to be resisted and spoken out of. So not every resistor has that experience of having their lives disillusioned and changed like that, like Haushofer, who had in fact served the regime until he knew better. And here was the poem that he found, and I apologize. I don't speak German at all. I know this, I've had it translated, in fact. I know it, but not by heart. And I don't have the English translation, so please forgive me for these 4 verses here. Forgive me for my illiterate German, and I hope you can understand me. It's called Schuld. Ich trage Leid an dem, was das Gericht mir Schuld benennen wird, an Plan und Sorgen. Verbrecher war ich, hätte für das Morgen des Volkes nicht geplant als eigener Pflicht. Doch schuldig bin ich anders als ihr denkt. Ich musste für meine Pflicht erkennen. Ich musste schärfer Anheil nennen. Mein Urteil habe ich viel zu lang gelebt. Ich klage mich in meinem Herzen an. Ich habe mein Gewissen lang betrogen. Ich habe mich selbst und andere belogen. Ich kannte früh des Jammers ganze Bahn. Ich habe geweint, nicht hart, genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. There is a word other than madness for the threats and preparations for nuclear war now being made by NATO and Russia over Ukraine or for any other reason. One word is madness, and the other is unheil. I hope I have said that. Good, clever. Thank you.
As we strive to understand what is happening in real time in our country and in our world, questions that perhaps we don't sufficiently confront are with us always. What should we do today? What can we do tomorrow? Daniel Ellsberg, that I know from many years of interacting with him, has that question uppermost in his mind, as do so many millions of people. Dan was an initiating advisor for exposefacts.org, which is very pleased to be here today in partnership with Courage Foundation, and I hope people here will more and more be providing support to the Courage Foundation. The only way we can make genuine progress is by willingness to engage in organizing and activism against the dominant current, against the forces that are propelling us to various forms of social and ecological disaster. We need allies, and on that note, I want to say a special thank you to Die Zeit and Zeit Online for helping to bring us here together today. What is this all about? I think it's all about what can be described in one word: democracy. And in our distress, the absence of democracy. Democracy that, to be in any way genuine, requires the informed consent of the governed. And we are ruled by forces and leaders who want the uninformed consent of the governed. And when we think about what that could possibly mean, what is the uninformed consent of the governed? There are many words for it, but some appropriate ones could be de facto dictatorship. We live now in 2015 in Germany and the United States and so many other parts of the world with an inversion of transparency. Instead of the government being transparent, it is the government being able to make our own ostensibly private lives transparent. And the rest of that inversion, of course, is that we are blocked from understanding the most fundamental aspects of what our governments are really doing. That's what we mean by the surveillance state. And meanwhile, as represented by the visit to this country in recent days by U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, and today by President Bush, there is the elongation and the depth of further strength of the warfare state. And in fact, the surveillance state and the warfare state are the same state. They are what Martin Luther King Jr. described as the madness of militarism, and it is in the service of that madness that Carter and now Obama are visiting this country. And so when we talk about this particular tour of 5 Americans being part of a Stand Up for Truth International Week that we're in the midst of, and William Binney, who has come to this city on more than one occasion, is now speaking in Chicago this week, and others are very active in concert with one another. What do we mean by Stand Up for Truth? Well, there are many different venues: the workplace, the home, the school, government, and in civil society. When we, the 5 Americans here today, have been traveling in the last days in London, Oslo, Norway, and now here in this country, we find, as in our own, nations that are desperately in need of whistleblowing, desperately in need of independent journalism, and the recognition and protection that you cannot have genuine independent journalism without whistleblowing. And the same is true vice versa as well. There's a petition outside on the table which you're invited to sign. It's been signed in recent days by more than 30,000 people in the United States and Germany and elsewhere. And I'd like to read its short text aloud to you. It's a petition to the governments of the United States and Germany. End the mass surveillance of people in violation of our basic rights, and end the practice of blowing people up with missiles from drones. And as we speak, more people are adding their names to that posted petition online at rootsaction.org. We live in a time, near and far, of impunity that is antithetical to democracy. It can be found in many places. Its switch points are implemented in many places on the globe, and unfortunately, have we learned through the help of your Spiegel and other media outlets in recent weeks, those switch points include the Ramstein. Those crimes become Germany's crimes also. The global surveillance and the perpetual war that continue, they walk hand in hand. Whistleblowers and independent journalism are absolutely essential as antidotes to the poisons of the madness of militarism and the suppression of information, which is so crucial for the continuing policies of our countries. If we don't have whistleblowing, if we don't have independent journalism, what we're left with is just the official story. And we know from one war to the next, from one mass human rights violation to the next, that the official story is replete with lies and half-truths and deceptions, including the deception known as silence. 7 years ago in this city, candidate Barack Obama was welcomed with great enthusiasm. And speaking personally for a moment, as an Obama delegate to the 2008 Democratic National Convention, I too greeted him in 2008 with enthusiasm as a candidate for President of the United States. Let us face facts today. The U.S. government is run by a president and a top leadership with an antipathy, even a horror, towards democracy. They want only the uninformed consent of the government. They want us to be silent. They want us to be pliant. They want us to be obsequious and deferential to their power. But as Daniel Ellsberg just referred to minutes ago, if we are silent, if we are deferential, it's a death knell not only for democracy, but for the ecosystem and indeed human life and other life on Earth. We have heard in recent days in the United States media, and I believe here as well, that something called the USA Freedom Act that was just signed by President Obama is some sort of major step forward against the surveillance state. I would say, not to mince words, that that is a deception. You might even call it a lie. What can we say about a new law that was supported by the National Security Agency that purportedly reins in the excesses of the National Security Agency? The war on whistleblowers continues. I sat through a trial for 7 days this year of CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling, who was convicted in the Washington, D.C. area, convicted as a whistleblower, convicted on the basis of entirely circumstantial metadata evidence. I'd like to close by mentioning to you, letting you know or reminding you about Martin Luther King, the fact that he was subjected to vicious surveillance by the United States government. The hostility from the White House increased during the last years of Dr. King's life, as he intensified his denunciations of what he called the madness of militarism. Dr. King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Today in Berlin and around the world, we recognize that the arc will not bend toward justice on its own. We must bend it together.
When Daniel Ellsberg just recently asked, what can we all do? It occurred to me that I answered this question for myself shortly after having the very unfortunate, very sad, and actually traumatic experience of watching 3,000 people die on 9/11 and knowing that the government had the information that could have prevented this. You cannot imagine such a terrible thing to realize that lack of government information sharing, not only inside of agencies, which they call stovepiping, where information is blocked vertically, but information is blocked horizontally between agencies. For instance, the CIA had been following two of the hijacker pilots for over 2 years and did not disclose that to the FBI until it was too late. To this day, no one knows why. We know that the one FBI agent admits he lied even to the joint 9/11 inquiry to the Inspector Generals. So, and then unfortunately there's one more aspect to this lack of information sharing, not only inside agencies, not only between agencies, but secrecy from the public.
And this isn't Coleen Rowley saying this. This is the official 9/11 Commission report's conclusion, that it was a lack of information sharing. So when you understand that now in the United States especially, I don't know if this is the case here, but in the United States we were told, and I should say one more thing, that conclusion occurred 3 years after 9/11. And so in the meantime, what Dick Cheney said, we'll go to the dark side. So they made a series of secret decisions to begin torturing, to begin kidnapping people, creating an off-site place for indefinite detention without due process. Eventually to have drone assassination that does not require any kind of judicial process. To launch war on the country that had nothing to do with 9/11, and yet they were able to get 70% of the American public to believe that Iraq was behind 9/11. So they did all these things quickly. And the truth, they always say, I think Mark Twain said this, the truth grows around the world while the lie goes around the world while the truth gets its pants on. And that's essentially what happened here. So I resolved myself that I would try to explain to people how this official theme, privacy versus security. That's what we're told. Secrecy, what you don't know, is going to protect you and going to keep you safe. It's going to keep you secure as long as officials keep their secrets. It is absolutely the opposite. I wrote 9/11 and WikiLeaks, what if? Because if there had been a way of getting this very crucial information out, that intelligence directors said their hair was on fire. They had so much intelligence flowing in. And if that information had been able, through a WikiLeaks or some other venue, to get out to the public, they could have really prevented 9/11. Again, this is extremely false to believe that your security and safety depends on secrecy. I would say democracy and security depends on democracy. It actually also depends on adherence to the rule of law. It depends on the First Amendment right to free speech and freedom of the press. Unfortunately, again in the United States, we have quite the opposite going on. We actually have oppression of whistleblowers telling the truth, and we actually have even a stifling of our reporters and journalists. They are threatened with subpoenas. They are themselves surveilled. They feel like they can't really tell the truth because they're always being watched for people, meeting sources. So, as I walked in today, and if you go out, please take note of this. If you probably go by it and you don't even spot it, but there's a nice quote by Benjamin Franklin. How many know that quote on the way in? Okay, so there's a lot of people that have to look at that quote on the way out. And Benjamin Franklin was our founding father. He really understood democracy. He really understood this problem of power corrupting and everything secret degenerating, which he probably learned from Lord Acton or something, I think. And so he was right at the start of democracy creation in the United States. What most of you probably don't know, Benjamin Franklin was the first American whistleblower. And he was a whistleblower. You'll have to Google this, because I don't know the exact story, but somehow he came into possession of a letter from the British monarchy to a colonial governor, and in this letter it said that the American colonists would have less rights than British citizens. This was before the Revolutionary War. So Benjamin Franklin took it on himself to get that out to people. And he was as vilified afterwards, called traitor. Benjamin Franklin was called all kinds of names by the colonist leaders, by the official colonists, just as much as Daniel Ellsberg, just as much as Edward Snowden, just as much as Martin Luther King Jr. which actually, I'll just follow that up. I mean, the FBI, my prior agency, tried to write anonymous letters to Martin Luther King Jr. to suggest he commit suicide on the eve of his acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize. You can really see where government secrecy is a pernicious thing. If you go back to that era at the end of the Vietnam War, the COINTELPRO era. For the people who are legislators in this room, I will also just mention one more thing. Frank Church, who was the leader of the church committee that eventually tried to get the truth out about this period of time and all of the abuses, we found out 2 years ago that Frank Church himself was targeted by the NSA. No one has known all this time. So let's just go back and remember what Benjamin Franklin said. Those who would sacrifice their liberty for a little security, and let me tell you, it's a false sense of security, will have neither.
Inspiring beginning to this talk. So now to get on to the panel discussion, what I'd like is just almost a scene-setting question, and we'll be jumping between German and English here with who speaks what. And I do apologise for everybody that's made me feel so welcome here in Germany that my German is still not at all good enough to do this in German. So my apologies for that. As Coleen was just saying, in the wake of 9/11, and this is something I know you talk about, Tom, there really does seem to have been a shift in the way our intelligence services work and operate. We now are beginning at least to understand the mass surveillance state that has grown. We understand how the US leans on many German countries to relax their privacy laws, or perhaps reinterpret them, and have formed extensive and very close relationships. I'd be interested to open with your understanding, Tom, as having worked in them, and then through your research in writing your book, how extensive is this relationship? What exactly is it we're dealing with? And then perhaps if the two lovely members from the inquiry can let us know, did you understand that this was the relationship as you were sitting in the Bundestag, and is the inquiry allowing you to understand this now? Tom, maybe you can kick us off.
Well, I call it, and there's a book written about this, double government. You have the extraordinarily secret government that has essentially been given license and cover from the public government. In the United States, someone called that the Trumanites versus the Madisonites. And something has to give. And yet, most of this is a result, ironically enough, of the Cold War, a national security state being established to deal with existential threats to the nation-state construct. And that never disappeared. 9/11 just unleashed it. And if anything, they actually granted themselves additional license to simply bypass existing law, violate constitutions, constraints that were given in terms of citizen rights. And under the rubric of national security, under the rubric of we need to make Americans feel safe again, under the rubric of ends justifies the means, that the threat was so great, although 9/11 was a systemic failure, the threat was so great that it was necessary to license unto ourselves what I can only call emergency law. And that body of national security law, which had hardly any oversight at all, in fact, in the early years, there literally was no oversight, began to create what I have called a cancer on the body of democracy. And it was then further enabled, as is inevitable in terms of history, that some of this would come out. That then you had legislation that was being passed by our Congress to make legal what had been illegal and unconstitutional. So now you have an additional veneer that's being placed on this that's providing additional cover. So in essence, the government now further institutionalized the very mechanisms by which they have taken upon themselves to violate the Constitution and existing law by making what was illegal lawful. This is the environment in which we're in, and it's very easy to continue to raise the fear, to promulgate fear, it's very easy to put up a straw man that don't you want to feel secure. And most people, when you're asked, of course I want to be secure. I don't want to feel like I'm threatened. I don't want to feel like something's going to be taken away from me. The question we must answer, and this is how I'll leave it for now, and I know we're going to be talking more about this, is can you actually have a double government coexisting? Can you really trade off your own foundational